Okay, thanks all for being here. Thank you, Naomi, for the introduction. Um, Buckle in because I've got way too many slides for y'all. Um, so I know I don't really have to explain what floristics is to this crowd, but it is being recorded and maybe some people don't know. So floristics is basically picking an area of land and then documenting all of the plants that occur there. And this is done through the physical collection of plant material, which then gets pressed and identified and put into herbaria, such as what we have here at the California Botanic Garden. And then these voucher specimens are used for all types of botanical research, including DNA analysis and biological research, et cetera. And then besides voucher specimens, the other primary result of a floristic study is an annotated checklist. So this is used by land management agencies, and it provides this understanding of what plants are occurring on the landscape and when they occurred there. And a lot of people think that floristics is, I mean, it's sort of falling out of fashion. A lot of people think, what's there left to explore? Why do we need to do this anymore? But there are so many reasons to still do floristic studies. Just one reason being that there are a lot of botanical black holes that remain. One study that documented this was Dean Taylor in 2014. He did a study of the density of herbarium specimens that have been collected in the North American West. And you can see here that Nevada is just a huge botanical black hole, and thanks to Perry Lee, is going to be working to fill some of that. But California has been pretty well documented, but there are still areas that remain under-collected, such as Kings County is weirdly under-collected. So why do we want to fill botanical black holes? It informs our understanding of plant diversity, species ranges, and potential threats to rare plant populations. We can't conserve plants if we don't know where they are, what's happening to them, all of that sort of stuff. But there are reasons to do floristic studies even in areas that have had a lot of previous botanical exploration. So just two examples are Calochortus and Rusfoldii and Baccharis malibuensis. Both of these plants were recently described, the Calochortus in 2015 and the Baccharis in 1995, from Los Angeles County. So these are two plants like this, or rather, these are places that have had a lot of people, high density of people, and we're still finding new plants to describe in these areas. So worth doing floristic work in botanical black holes, but also in areas that maybe we don't think we need to. It's especially important to be doing this right now and into the coming future. So we are currently in this new geological era called the Anthropocene, which is characterized by a lot of human activity. One of the impacts of human activity is climate change, right? So we have these changing fire regimes, rising temperatures, increased drought conditions, and we also have more direct human activity such as deforestation, pollution, the introduction of invasive species, et cetera. And all of these are going to have inevitable impacts on plant life. Just one of these impacts is extinction. So in North America alone, since European settlement, approximately 65 vascular plant species have gone extinct. And accounting for the fact that we are still describing new species, this number is probably a lot higher. I mean, we can guarantee that it's actually a lot higher. Most of these have gone extinct in the western US, especially in California. You can see all of these white dots are places that they've documented extinct species. So besides the extinction crisis, we also have a lot of reasons to study in California. One being that California is a biodiversity hotspot. We have 6,600 plant taxa, more than a third of which are endemic to the state. This results in rates of endemism that are higher than any other state or province in North America and north of Mexico. So there's a lot of plants here. There's a lot of plants to study, and it's important to be studying them because of climate change. California also has a lot of different habitat types. So we have coastal, we have desert, we have mountains. I'm particularly fond of mountains, so let's talk about that. Climate change is going to be affecting mountains a lot. So higher elevation environments often experience more rapid changes in temperatures compared to lower elevation environments. That has a lot to do with, like, similar to the North and South Pole, where there's like perennial snow that's reflecting back light. As temperatures increase, the snow's going to melt. We're going to get, like, not exponential, but like increasingly higher temperatures in the mountains. Plants that are adapted to these cooler temperatures are going to follow these cooler temperatures upslope until they just run out of room, have nowhere to go. They either find like little microhabitat refugia or they go extinct. One of the coolest mountain ranges in California, in my humble opinion, is the Sierra Nevada. So Sierra Nevada is a hotspot for endemism and plant diversity in California. Even though it makes up only a fifth of the total land area of the state, it contains over half of the plant taxa that are present here. And some of these plants are really like charismatic, cool plants that even people outside of California, like outside of the United States, know of. Just one example is giant sequoia, pictured here with my dad. So knowing all of this, and for a multitude of other reasons, I decided to do my own floristic study in the Sierra Nevada. You can see my study site right here, where this white dot is. So let's zoom in. We are right here at California Botanic Garden in Los Angeles County. My study site is north of Los Angeles in the Southern Sierras. Moving in a little closer. The closest cities are Bakersfield to the west and Ridgecrest to the east. And then the closest town, the closest place you can get cell phone service is Kernville, California. Entirely within Tulare County, but Kern County and Inyo County are pretty close by as well. Zooming in even more. So the entire study site is on the Sequoia National Forest, about 50 square miles in total, with the Salmon Creek watershed making up the 25 square miles to the west, and the Manter Creek watershed making up 25 square miles to the east. Almost the entire Manter Creek watershed is on the Domeland Wilderness, which is displayed here in this darker green. The highest elevation is Soretta Peak, up at almost 10,000 feet, and the lowest is the Kern River Salmon Creek confluence at about 3,400 feet. Some of the bigger landmarks are like Big Meadow, as you can see here, Manter Meadow and Horse Meadow. And Soretta Peak is popular for climbers and stuff. So let's talk about the Salmon Creek. Salmon Creek's about 12 miles long. The watershed is approximately 25 square miles. Has this huge range in elevation. Both the highest and lowest points of the study site are in the Salmon Creek watershed. It's a tributary of the North Fork of the Kern River. And fun fact, it has the highest waterfall in the southern Sierra Nevada at 450 feet. So we can talk about it, but let's look at it. So this is from Soretta Peak, which is the highest point, looking down over the whole, pretty much the Salmon Creek watershed is what's visible here. You can see Big Meadow at 7,700 feet. Just to say, the Salmon Creek originates up near Soretta Peak and then flows through Big Meadow, flows through coniferous forest, and then through Horse Meadow. Then we go through this like granitic bed rock. Like the water just like goes through and makes like these cute little teacups that people like to go swimming in. Plummets off the Kern Plateau, 450 feet, and then meets up with the North Fork of the Kern River. So super beautiful. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. So Steve Evans from California Wilderness Coalition wrote this report to the Forest Service in 2017. Recommending that the Salmon Creek be labeled wild and scenic, which is a federal designation that works to protect the free-flowing characters of rivers throughout the United States. It maintains it for free-flowing and then also for recreation. And then good news, in 2019, the Sequoia National Forest Management Plan said, yes, it's eligible, so now it just needs to go to Congress, and that might take a while. But so the Manter Creek is the other side of the watershed. This is approximately 9.1 miles long, entirely within the Domeland Wilderness. It's a tributary of the South Fork of the Kern River, relatively undisturbed compared to the Salmon Creek. And it contains little kern golden trout, which is an imperiled subspecies of our state fish. So pretty cool. I don't have that same series of photos following the Manter Creek like I do with the Salmon Creek, but I do have photos of some of the prominent landmarks. So Manter Meadow is probably one of the more popular places to visit in the Domeland Wilderness, at least in like my area of it. Church Dome, so Domeland Wilderness is named for all of these granitic domes that are found throughout the area. Church Dome is one of the biggest and most popular, very popular for climbers. We have Rock House Peak, which is, if you know Rock House Basin, the PCT passes through there. Taylor Dome, White Dome, lots of really cool domes. So the Manter and the Salmon Creek watersheds are both within the larger Kern River watershed, which is a really important source of hydroelectric power, agriculture, and drinking water. It's the southernmost major river system in Sierra Nevada and the only one that drains south, and it drains down to Bakersfield and provides Bakersfield with a lot of its water. A lot of the agricultural area gets its water from here. So important to be studying these watersheds that are in watersheds that we get our water from, that we drink from. Like, we need to know the health of the watershed, which means understanding the health of the plants in the watershed. Kern River is really cool, 165 miles long, 151 miles of it have federal wild and scenic designation, even though it has been like dammed in a couple of places. Pretty beautiful. I only did this once. I only hung out once. Moving on to geology. If you know anything about the Sierra Nevada, it is just this big pile of granite, which stands in my study site as well. All of this white is granite. So most of the study site is that. But I'll point out just a couple of unique ones. So metasedimentary rock, you can see, and then also alluvium, right where Big Meadow is. And then the one that I've found the most interesting, tertiary basalt over here. So this is like an ancient like volcano like flow. And it really stands out on the landscape. So you can see like the granitic domes and all the granite, and then just this one black mountain that's named Black Mountain. So pretty cool. And important to mention just because plants can be endemic to like certain types of rock. So I focused in on this for part of the project just to see like, oh, are there different plants growing on volcanic rock versus granite? Let's see. Okay, so the climate of the study site. So the study site is in the California Floristic Province, which has a Mediterranean climate. Mediterranean climate is characterized by cold, wet winters and prolonged dry summers. It's the only place in North America with this climate. Others are the Mediterranean Basin, South Africa, southwestern Australia, and central Chile. So in the greater context of the whole world, Mediterranean climates are relatively rare and often have cool plants. Another important thing to mention, so Sierra Nevada has this rain shadow effect. As rain comes off the ocean, it hits the western side of the Sierras and then dumps a lot of rain. And then as on the eastern side of the Sierras, we get this rain shadow that ends up being the Mojave Desert, where you don't get as much rain. It's a lot drier, arid. So you can see that here, where it's like wetter, greener, and then we get the desert over here. But we also have a smaller rain shadow effect in the Kern Canyon. So as air drops, it gets warm and more arid, and then we get like sort of a wetter environment on the western side of the Kern Plateau, and then as we move east, it gets drier. So how does that impact my study site? Part of my study site is in Kern Canyon, so I have like that drier rain shadow effect there, and then in the Salmon Creek watershed tends to be wetter, and then as you move east across the study site, it gets drier and more of like a desert influence. You can also see that with air temperatures. So I got this data from 2 weather stations just outside my study site. Soretta Ridge is near Soretta Peak, which is the highest point in my study site, and then Kern Canyon, the lowest point in my study site. So between the two, we can get a pretty good idea of what temperatures are like across the whole study site. Lowest temperatures are up at Soretta Ridge, below 0 degrees Celsius, so below freezing. And then highest temperatures get up to about 27 degrees, average around 27 degrees Celsius in Kern Canyon, but the highest temperatures can be in the low 100s degree Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius. Precipitation following the Mediterranean climate, most precipitation is in the winter months, and most is as snow. But there are some thunderstorms in the spring and summer that don't end up with substantial precipitation, but it does contribute. Every little bit counts. You can see that here. Low precipitation in the summer. So average snow depth, I bring this up mainly just to show how precipitation varied pretty widely across the years of the study. So average snow depth is 143 centimeters. 2019 was a fantastic year, super bloom, and snow depth was well above normal at 300 centimeters. But then 2020 and 2021 both were low rates of precipitation, and we were in drought. So you can see that here, only about 100-ish, and then below 100 centimeters in 2021. So I can actually show that to you. This is a satellite photo from April 24th, 2019. You can see Big Meadow right here. Great snow, lots of it. And then 2020, we have less snow. And then 2021 is just, and these are all around the same date, right? So it's just pretty, 2021 was not a good rain year. So what does this mean? It means high risk of fires. This picture was taken in 2021, leading up to my study site. And the area does have a history of fires. So 2 big fires have happened in the study site. The McNally fire from 2002 got into just a small portion of the northwest corner of the study site. That was actually the largest fire of the 2002 fire season. And then the Manter fire burned, it was in 2000, and really burned most of the Domeline Wilderness and almost all of the Manter Creek watershed. And we'll get into repercussions of that later. One last bit of location information. So the study site is entirely within the southern High Sierra Nevada Jepson ecoregion, but it is at this confluence of several different ecoregions. So we have the San Joaquin Valley, southern Sierra Nevada foothills, Tehachapi Mountain area, and the Mojave Desert, all sort of coming together in this area. And what that means is so these different ecoregions are kind of characterized by the plants that occur in them. So as we get confluences and boundaries, we start to see plants getting into areas that we wouldn't necessarily expect them to be. Maybe like a plant that's mostly in the Mojave Desert might be sneaking its way into the southern High Sierra Nevada, especially once we consider climate change and how that's going to be changing the landscape and changing the places that these plants like to be. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is my study site's in the southern Sierra Nevada, so all these plants that are like the Sierra Nevada mountains are going to be at the southern edge of their range. So again, as climate change is heating things up, it might be pushing them further north to get away from those higher temperatures. So it's important to be documenting plants where they are right now, because they might not be there in 100 years. Or they might be, we'll see. Okay, human impacts. So humans have been in the area for approximately 4,000, or since approximately 4,000 BCE, and then started making more stable settlements between 1200 BCE and 600 CE. The Tuba-Tulabal tribe is the tribe that is mainly in the Kern River watershed. They tended to have permanent settlements along the north and south forks of the Kern River and get up into higher elevations, which would have been my study site during the summer. They did a lot of foraging, and they also used fire management as a tool. So this just is indicating that there has been human activity and human impacts on the landscape for a very long time. European American settlers came to the area around 1820 to 1850. Edward M. Kern, Naomi. Settlers didn't start coming into the southern Sierras until much later. The gold rush brought a lot of people to California into the Sierras in about 1848. But Kernville, which is the closest town, wasn't established until 1858. So this was just because the southern Sierras didn't have as much gold, was more rugged. People were like, well, there's no reason to go down there. These are pictures from old Kernville, because it used to be where Lake Isabella is now. So very cool. With the gold rush came a higher population and the need for beef. So grazing began in the Sierra Nevada around the 1860s, and this was both sheep and cattle. By the 1890s, grazing peaked, and millions of sheep were present in the Sierra Nevada. There's this really famous quote by John Muir where he's like calling them locusts because they were just like decimating everything. So much so that by 1898, sheep were banned, but cattle remained. So when the Forest Service started coming in and doing their thing, grazing permits were introduced in 1905 to 06. And cattle grazing continues in the study site to this day, especially mainly the cattle are present around Big Meadow and Horse Meadow, but they are free range, so I've seen them like on the road up to the study site. This is a really cool quote. So hikers passing through Big Meadow on their way from Bakersfield to Mount Whitney in 1889. It was noticed that this meadow, like all, has been overfed. Yearly, the crop of grasses is decreasing. Now it is nothing like to what it was 2 years ago, and if continually overstocked ere very long, meadows will become deserts to all intents and purposes. No offense to our desert enthusiasts, but just to say that like there have been cattle here for a long time at this point, and the consequences of them have been seen for a while now. Logging wasn't really a problem in the Southern Sierras until after World War II, when the lumber demand rose. People were even still, people were starting to like pick off the low-hanging fruit in like the foothills of the Sierras, and then as they needed more lumber, they started moving onto the Kern Plateau. And then 1960s and 70s, Sherman Pass Road was finished, which connects Kern Canyon to the eastern side of the Sierras. And once that happened, people started logging on the Kern Plateau. And you can see the remnants of that in my study site today, where there's a lot of like old logging roads that don't really seem like they're being used now, but had been in the past. And logging was happening during the study as well. I'm not quite sure. It wasn't clear cutting, so it seemed Naomi and I were like, maybe it's just burn treatment, like they're trying to like clear the canopy, but I need to talk to the Forest Service about what they're doing. So recreation is by far one of the most abundant uses of the land. So there's a couple of established campgrounds, namely Horse Meadow Campground is the most popular. There's a lot of dispersed campsites throughout the study site. There's also some homes on Horse Meadow that seem to be used mainly during the summer. And then of course there's a lot of hiking, backpacking, fishing, hunting, etc. The canal trail goes through my study site, and you can start up at like Sherman Pass Road and go all the way down to Kernville. So it's really popular with mountain bikers. And there's been a couple instances of me like laying on the trail, taking pictures of flowers, and then having to like get out of there. And then some people use pack animals to go into Manter Meadow, like these cute goats. So, history of botanical documentation. Prior to the study, about 1,142 historical collections were made by 31 total collectors. Most of the collections were done in the 60s and 70s, and most of them were around Big Meadow and Horse Meadow in the Salmon Creek watershed. Just 242 were from the Domeline Wilderness, and honestly, like, just as an aside, like, a lot of the Domeline Wilderness is under-collected. So if you know someone who needs to do a floristic study, point them towards the Domeline Wilderness. So, one of the most prominent collectors was Ernest C. Twizzleman. So he collected 317 total collections in the study site between 1964 and 1972. And just to say, he passed away in 1972, so it's pretty likely that he would have continued to do more collecting in the study site, because he was up there every year, multiple times a year, documenting the flora. He is also one of the most prominent collectors in the southern Sierra Nevada, and so much so that they named a botanical area after him, which is just like northeast of my study site near Soretta Peak. Most of his collections were from Big Meadow, Horse Meadow, Manter Meadow, and Soretta Pass. And then Howell and True also did quite a bit of collecting in the study area, so they made 422 total collections, mostly in 1966, 70, and 71, and mostly around Big Meadow and Horse Meadow. And they actually produced a checklist from one of their trips, but it includes areas like outside of the study site as well. Other prominent collectors include Jim Shivak, Mary DeDecker, David Charlton, and Duncan Bell. Duncan, Shivak, and DeDecker all did a lot of collecting in the Domeline Wilderness. So basically all of my understanding of the Domeline Wilderness going into the project was because of their efforts. So I don't think Duncan's here, but thank you, Duncan. Okay, so project objectives. So as with all floristic studies, main goal was to produce a systematic inventory and an annotated checklist of the vascular flora. So wanted to focus on high priority areas such as black holes, different habitat types, different soil types, etc. Also, a goal is to document and notify land management of threats and disturbances, and to document plant species of conservation concern. So first thing that I did was make a preliminary checklist using Consortium of California Herbaria, SciNet, and the California Natural Diversity Database. This was made to give myself a baseline to compare to today, right? But also to inform the field work that I was going to be doing. So I know where people are collecting, go try to hit botanical black holes, or if wherever they collected rare species, something like this, I know, relocate them. Also, again, wanted to focus on areas lacking previous documentation, different habitat types, etc. So most of the fieldwork was done between April and September in 2019 through 2021, mainly in 2020 and 2021. 86 field days over 24 trips, and I made a total of 1,412 collections, all of which have detailed locality data with them. And then identifications were made primarily using the Jepson, but I did use Flora of North America a lot, and also some family and genus keys outside of that, especially Mike Simpson's Cryptantha website is very helpful. Approximately 200 out of 1,142 historical collections have been annotated so far, but I am planning on doing some more this summer. Some expert help was acquired. Thank you, Naomi, for helping with Phrymaceae. Mike Simpson helped a lot with Boraginaceae. Travis helped with Eriogonum and grasses, and Mare helped with Carex. Voucher specimens will be deposited at CalBG, and dupes were going to be sent to CAS and UC. Here we go. All my work right here. So the white dots are mine, the black dots are historical collections. Just to point out some areas that I'm really proud of that I got into. So there were basically no collections from the Kern Canyon part of my study site. So that's all me. And then really proud of like the areas that I managed to get into in the Domeline Wilderness. This is like really rugged, like dense chaparral. It's hard to bushwhack through. So really glad to have added to our understanding of that area. Vegetation types. So vegetation types are not an exact science, but they do provide some valuable context when we're considering where plant species occur and which taxa they may occur with. So there's a few different types of vegetation like analyses that are out there. So I used Holland and Kiel 1995, and I identified 8 communities in the study site. So let's run through them. So mixed chaparral is primarily down in Kern Canyon in like the lowest elevations of the study site. Here's Aaron and Dylan and Lou, like really being great field assistants, bushwhacking. Montane chaparral is mainly in the burn scars. So this is like the Manter Creek watershed is just a lot of montane chaparral mainly. Mixed conifer forest is probably the most dominant veg type in the Salmon Creek watershed. Lots of ABs, lots of pinus. Jeffrey pine forest, based on what I've seen online and through talking to people, it seems like Jeffrey pine forests were one of the dominant veg types in the Manter Creek watershed prior to the fire. Now they're mainly in these areas that have like perennial water sources, like in the Manter Creek corridor, like around water. Lodgepole pine forest is mainly in like these flat areas that are moist, like around meadows. And they tend, you can see that sort of in the understory area. There's like kind of meadow vegetation leading into it. Subalpine forest is only at the highest elevations around like Strata Peak and Strata Pass. And montane riparian areas are found pretty much throughout the entire study site, especially around the Manter Creek and the Salmon Creek, but also in like these like seeps and stuff like this have very similar veg types. Montane meadows. I have like 4 big montane meadows in my study site, but there's a lot of like smaller ones spread like in openings of mixed conifer forest. And these tend to be in like these large valleys, flat, where water can accumulate. This picture was taken in 2019. It was so green and beautiful. So this is now moving. The next 2 are outside of the Holland and Kiel designated veg types, but I think they're worth mentioning. Aquatics are throughout the study site. This is a pond that's in the middle of Big Meadow. And they tend to be like where there's like stagnant water, like slow moving water. And this is all Potamogeton natans. It's really cool. And then granitic outcrops are also found throughout the study site. And you can like go to any granitic outcrop and like list the plants that you're probably gonna find there. It's usually like the same assemblage of plants. And just to give you some context for how big these things are, this is Kier. They're just like, these are huge, beautiful like things on the landscape. Okay, so there were 1,142 historical collections, and with adding mine in, I more than doubled the amount of collections in the study site, so now there's 2,554. The Domeland Wilderness had 242, and again, doubled it, so now there's 813 total collections in that area, so helpful. Numerical summary, okay. So I had 591 minimum rank taxa between historical collections and my own. 451 minimum rank taxa had been historically documented in the study site, so that means I added 142. But 104 were not relocated, which I will get into why that might be in a little bit. As we're moving through the results section, I just kind of want to take a moment to like actively compare to some other studies, just to give some context for like, thank you. Just to give some context, because otherwise, like, what do these numbers mean, right? So here's my study site in yellow. You can see Naomi's study site here, the Owens Peak Eastern Watershed, and then the Kiava Wilderness here, South Fork Tulare River, and then way up there are Marty's and Joy's all the way to the north. My reason for choosing some of these, well, these ones are super close, so of course worth comparing to. These 2 are more desert floras, so we can see some of the differences and like how the desert plants might be like getting into the study site from the east. Jessica's, the South Fork Tulare River, is pretty similar to mine, just gets lower in elevation. And then the ones way up to the north are actually like pretty similar elevations, although they do get much higher. And they're still in the Sierra Nevada, so worth comparing to. Okay. So looking at the number of taxa per kilometer squared across these 6 different study sites, mine is fairly high, and I think most of the reason for this is just the wide elevation change seen across the study site. So Kiava Wilderness, I was looking at this, I was like, whoa, why is that so low? It's because she had like the lowest change in elevation across in her study site across these 6. Joy's, I don't know what's going on with Joy's. This is incredible. I think she had a big elevation range too, but similar to mine, so I'm not, gotta talk to Joy about the Upper Rock Creek, I don't know. Top families in the study site, this is pretty consistent with what's seen really like across the world, right? Asteraceae and Poaceae are 2 of the top families in the world. Cyperaceae, I have a lot of these big meadows that are dominated by carex and grasses, so of course that makes sense. Polygonaceae, Eriogonum is in Polygonaceae and is one of the most diverse genuses in the North American West. So that makes sense. And then Brassicaceae is also one of the more diverse families. I also have a lot of non-native Brassicaceae in my study site, so that could have something to do with it. Top genera, so carex was number 1. Again, makes sense because of all the meadows. Eriogonum was also very high. Again, makes sense because it's super speciose in the West. What is weird, across those 6 studies, Carrick's was #1 for mine, Joy's, and Marty's, and those were the other higher elevation ones all the way to the north. So they also had montane meadows, so that makes sense. But none of them had Salix and Castanea in their top 5 genera. So I don't know what the heck is going on with that. Very weird. Cryptantha, Naomi, and Erica, those 2 desert floras to the east, both had Cryptantha in their top families. So that might be some of that desert influence getting into the study site. Lupinus is also super diverse and also super, who knows what's going on with that. Life forms, so the most dominant life form in the study site was perennial herbs, and then followed by annual herbs, shrubs, trees. So again, Naomi's and Erica's, those 2 desert floras, had annuals as their top ones. And this makes sense because their desert floras, annuals do really great in the desert because it gets too hot. We're like, okay, we're just going to put down seeds. We're going to die. We'll come back when conditions are better. But you can see South Fork Tulare River and Marty's study site, both of those are similar elevation. Both have perennials as their top life forms as well. So perennials just tend to do better in the mountains where they can like go dormant during the cold years and get their roots down when it's nice, when it's cold and windy. Sensitive taxa, so I had 28 total sensitive taxa in the study site. There were 27 originally, so I added 1 to the Flora, which is Angelica Kalei, #2 up there. All the ones that are in bold are ones that I was able to relocate, or the one that I found. So I was able to relocate 12 sensitive taxa, which is, yeah, out of 27, why only 12, right? So let's, and then also going back to the earlier question of why was I not able to relocate 102 of the historically collected species, there's several reasons. So drought, as I mentioned, 2 years of my study were drought years. So annuals like Nemacletus twizzlemanii, so 1B.2, it was last collected at the study site by Jim Shivak in 1982 in the Domeland Wilderness. Again, annuals in drought years are just like, we're going to wait, we'll come back later. This plant just might not have come up during my study, or if it did come up, it's super small, like super small. So I just might not have been able to find it, even though I did look for it. Kira and I looked for it. Additionally, where it was collected historically has since burned, so it might not have liked that, and it might not be there anymore. So possible extirpation, right? Another example of that is Caloptridium pygmaeum, which is a 1B.2. Last collected by Twizzleman, Howell, and True in 1970 on the west side of Big Meadow. So this is it's right next to a horse corral. It says that on the herbarium label. So human activity, horse and cattle activity, it might not like that. It might not be able to handle that, and it might have been extirpated since then. Additionally, it's also another annual, so it might just not have come up in the drought years. And finally, I can't be everywhere at once. So Lewistia dicephala is a 1B.2, last collected by Jim Shivak in 1984 near Church Dome. It flowers really early, and road access to the area isn't open until middle to late May. So this might have flowered and been done by the time I was able to even get up there. And again, might have been impacted by the drought and just decided not to flower. But some of the plants that I did find that are rare, let's go through them. So Fritillaria pinetorum is a 4.3 that I found in Big Meadow. Kind of interesting that it came up in Big Meadow because there's a lot of cattle grazing there. So I found it my first year, but then I didn't find it the second year in that same spot. So cattle grazing's been going on for years, so I don't know, maybe, I don't know what's going on with it. Caroquistia murray is a 1B.3 that I found a couple of occurrences of near Church Dome. It's a monotypic genus. It's a pretty cool plant. Fricera tubulosa comes up pretty commonly in Jeffrey pine forest and montane chaparral. It's a pretty cool plant. Eriogonum polypodum. This is the southernmost occurrence for this plant. It's known as Tulare County buckwheat. It's also called foxtail buckwheat, and it tends to occur with foxtail pines, which is where I found it in my study site. It's the highest elevations with the foxtail pines. It's a cute one. Gray-leaved violet is a 1B.2. Marty and I, we don't believe this should be a 1B.2. We find this everywhere. We don't know what's like. And I don't know that it actually has anything to do with volcanic rock, but that's the only place I really found it was up on Black Mountain and like kind of around it, and kind of like drier places than you would expect to find violas. It's a cool one. And then finally, Silene aperta is a 4.3. Found this in lodgepole pine forest at the south end of Big Meadow. I like this photo because it's just like, what? It's just a bug eating a bug on a rare plant. It's just to show that rare plants are good places for bugs. They're important, even though if they're in limited numbers, they're important on the landscape. Okay, moving on to non-native taxa. So there's 33 total non-native taxa in the study site, making up 5% of the flora. Most non-natives were in Kern Canyon or meadows, which makes sense. So non-natives tend to be habitat generalists. They tend to occur in greater numbers at lower elevations. And then as you move up, they're like, oh, it's too cold, we don't like this. So, which stands with what I was seeing. So most of the non-natives were at the lowest elevations in Kern Canyon, and those that were at higher elevations tend to be around meadows, along roadsides, places that were like frequently visited by people or cattle. Two of the biggest families were Poaceae and Brassicaceae, which actually stands with what you see across the entire state of California. Those are the two largest non-native families as well. Looking at those other 5 floras again, pretty much is equivalent with some of these other ones. The two that I'll point out is Marty's, Coyote Ridge and Flat, which is one of those like northern high elevation study sites. He only had 2.5, but his study site is super high in elevation, so it makes sense that he had less non-natives. And then Jessica's, the South Fork Tulare River, having 12.5, her study site gets the lowest in elevation out of all of these, and she's also directly adjacent to the Central Valley, so I'm assuming maybe some agricultural activity, thank you, is getting into her study site, but pretty much equivalent with the other ones. So these were the new non-native taxa that I documented during the study. Historically, there were 23 non-natives documented. I documented 11 new to the flora, and I did not relocate 13. Just to show again, like most of these new ones were from Kern Canyon, which also hadn't had a lot of documentation previously, so these plants might have been there for a while, and then I was just the first to go out there and document them. The other ones were around the meadows, along trails, and Cecimbrium altissimum is kind of a weird one. I found it like kind of in the burn scar like throughout it, so. Just want to show, again, like really hit home where these plants are occurring. So most of the non-natives, again, down in Kern Canyon over there, around the meadows, along roadsides. Not as many in the Domeland Wilderness. Those that are there are around the meadow, on the trails, or it's Bromus tectorum, which just is everywhere. So endemic taxa. So 102 plants were endemic to California, which is 17% of the flora. This is pretty high, which makes sense because it is in the California floristic province. If you compare it to Sophie Winitsky's flora, which isn't on that map, but she's in the Great Basin floristic province. She only has 2 California endemics in her study. So this is going to be a crazy difference. 37 were endemic to the Sierra Nevada, and 21 were endemic to the southern Sierra Nevada. This is my favorite. Foxtail pines. So Pinus balfouriana, the subspecies Astrina, is the one that's endemic to the Sierras. And this is the southernmost population for foxtail pines is in my study site. So again, super important to document this plant because as climate change is impacting the region, this population might not be able to hang out anymore at like the southernmost place in the Sierras. So took a bunch of time to go admire these plants and document them and make sure that the population's doing okay. And It is. So I was able to find little babies, and I don't know if you want to call them like teenagers or something, or whatever. So all age ranges of the tree. So it seems like they're doing okay. Naomi and I did observe some browning in 2021 during the drought year, so important to document, but it does seem like overall the population is healthy. I just love this quote because I think it's a little silly. Joe Fontaine wrote like the book on the Kern Plateau in 2009. And he has this quote, according to authorities, these are the finest foxtails anywhere. I don't know who these authorities are, but as an authority, I agree. Okay, so another southern Sierra Nevada endemic is Orionena clementis. This is a really cute one. Apiace occurs on like decomposed granite in like montane coniferous forest and montane chaparral. Pretty cute. And then, what do you think this is? Have any guesses? Huh? Oh, no. It's red. It's happy. It's endemic. You're right. You looked at this ahead of time. Yeah, Ipomopsis aggregata, subspecies Bridgei. So this is a southern Sierra Nevada endemic, and yeah, this is crazy. I just like came around a corner and I was like, this is insane. It's so pretty. Okay, last bit. Noteworthy collections. So Gentiana newberrii, variety Teogana. I was able to find a new southernmost population for this species. Robert and I did. We extended the southern range by 40 miles, so that's pretty significant. It was previously collected by Mrs. Joseph Clemens in 1910 in Big Meadow, but she didn't identify it to variety, so it still counts. It's just a super crazy, beautiful plant. Angelica Calei was the one new rare plant for the study. So, and not only was it a new rare plant, but it also extended the distribution eastward by 16 miles. So pretty cool. This is Apiaceae. And I did not take any photos of it because I was like, oh, it's just another Angelica, whatever. And then I got home, what? So we found one putative hybrid. The area south of Mount Whitney is known to be a zone of contact between Diplacus mephiticus and Diplacus bicolor. And Naomi and I found this plant, and then I came back and I was trying to ID it, and I was like, Naomi, I need your help. So we figured out that this is a hybrid between the two species. Thank you, Naomi. And then finally, Lewisia pygmaea. So it has been collected south of the Sierra Nevadas before, but it hadn't been collected in like the southern Sierras. So this, I was able to collect it in like sort of a lodgepole pine forest area and connect the range of the species and find its new southernmost point in the southern Sierras. So pretty cute and also very cute. Actually, Marty's the one who found it. He's like, oh. It's cute. Okay, wrapping it up. I just want to end with talking about the fire and how it like really impacted the landscape, especially of the Manter Creek watershed. So this area was Jeffrey pine forest, montane coniferous forest, and then the Manter fire in 2000 really like busted through the area and kind of changed it, at least for the long term. So you can see here's a picture of the fire, which you can't find these photos online. I made a friend at the trailhead, and he sent me these photos. But so he also got some great plant photos. Yeah, like Argemini or Romnia. They look one. Argemini, okay. So, and I think maybe Malacothamnus. Maybe we need to take a closer look at this. But I didn't find either Argemini or Malacothamnus in my study. So these plants obviously came up in droves like after the fire and are now no longer there. I'm not sure what, Saltugilia maybe, some sort of little thing like that. Again, didn't find any in my flora. But now what's happening is we just have this huge burn scar across the landscape of montane chaparral. And significant because I'm not finding any like young trees in this. You would think like 22 years out from the fire there might be some movement towards back to what it was before. And you have like these trees that are hanging out again in like areas that were probably protected from the fire, like around water on like sort of like granitic outcrops, but a majority of the area, you can really see it here, it's just like this huge burn scar. So it's just important to be documenting plants in these areas that are being heavily impacted by climate change, and that we might be getting like this permanent, or not permanent, but like long-term habitat conversion to something, that it wasn't before. So just to say that this could be you looking over the rest of the Domeland Wilderness that is your study site, because it needs to be collected. People need to be doing work here. Okay. Thank you. Thank you to these organizations for providing funding. I couldn't have done this study without them. Thank you to all my field assistants. You made it fun, you made it productive, and ultimately got my mom off my back so I wouldn't have to go by myself. She will watch this later. And there she is. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for listening to me talk for an hour. I need water.